I want to introduce Alice White, the Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Danaher. She's here to discuss a really exciting, innovative onboarding process that I think is game-changing for her company. So we're looking forward to hearing about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank
All
you
right.
for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm not sure it's going to be innovative, but it's definitely different. And I thought I'd start by at least explaining what my perspective is coming into sharing this with you, because I'm new to Danaher. I've been with Danaher about a year. And I came from an environment where I'd been for 12 years, where we had really dialed in a lot of our talent acquisition and onboarding and shared services. So I had a fresh perspective coming in. And if you're not familiar with Danaher, it's a huge company, right? I'm part of a big company that has 70 companies inside of it. It's more of a holding company than anything else. So if you haven't heard of Danaher, our brand isn't as well known outside of some circles. You may have heard of some of our brands. And specifically, I'm working now with the life sciences and diagnostics group of brands. So this shows how all of our brands hang together. And I'm focused on life sciences and diagnostics. So I work with 7 big global operating companies that make diagnostic equipment, medical equipment. So just to frame how I come into the equation, because I think this was new to me when I first experienced it as a candidate and then as an employee. And it's been really interesting leading the talent acquisition function for this group of companies, how this immersion, which is our proprietary approach to how we do onboarding, how that impacts the pull through on our talent acquisition results, and how we use that, the fact that we do immersion, as a part of our recruiting pitch. So I thought I'd start by at least explaining a little bit about Danaher. So you saw the slide that has all the brands. I mean, we're above 150 on the Fortune 100 list, and we have really high performing stocks. So from a financial standpoint, we're a really well-known company from a stock standpoint. From an employment branding standpoint, not so much. So I think we end up doing a lot more one-on-one explaining of that to candidates, and part of explaining that is explaining the Danaher Business System. So Danaher has a way that we run our businesses that is unique to us. It's nothing that we created. I heard someone earlier, I think she might be in the room, mention using a kaizen approach to looking for process improvement opportunities. Most of the Danaher Business System is a combination of really good best practices that were developed elsewhere. So the Toyota manufacturing system, lean, the approach to kaizen, which is continuous improvement. None of this is stuff that we've created, but we've kind of pulled it together in our own way that we use consistently to run these businesses. And our whole approach is to buy good companies and make them better and keep them. So you need to understand that framework to understand why onboarding might be so important and immersion might be so important. We're globally diverse. The Danaher Business System is really all that we have in common for all of these different brands. You saw the slide with all of the different logos. The one thing they all have in common is this Danaher Business System. And our immersion approach to onboarding is how we make sure everyone understands that and uses it. So it's really who we are and how we do what we do. So it's comprised of our values, and those are our 5 core values. Those are the values that we have in every one of our operating companies. It works for life sciences, it works for the tool manufacturing companies. It's basic stuff, right? And it's probably not too dissimilar from some of what you guys have as your defined values. It's good company stuff. Then we have our leadership anchors, which are the core anchors that we hire to and that we manage and develop people to for our leaders in our organization. And that includes things like charting the course. What's that? Well, that's having a strategy and having a vision. It's driving innovation and growth. That's what we have to do for our future performance. And leading through DBS. That's one of our core leadership anchors, is that we look for this in all of our leaders. So we're hiring for this, and then we're expecting people to lead in our environment through this. So that's why learning what it is really, really critical. And then we have processes and tools that we use to run our business that are the same. So you can go into a small company that we have up here in Sunnyvale that does, I don't even know what they're called, but they're these giant machines that fill up these test tubes in the back part of labs where they're doing biologics experiments, right? That company is going to be run with the same cadence of meetings, with the same content in the monthly management review, with the same metrics, with the same measures, different initiatives, but it's going to be run the same way. Every month you're going to be able to go into that company in Sunnyvale and parachute in on a meeting if you need to, and it's going to be run the same way as a tool manufacturing company in Ohio will be for us. So that's why this is so important. So Danaher Business System fundamentals. So what does this mean to you guys? Why would this be interesting? I'm not recommending that anyone try to implement this same approach, but I think there's some things that I've learned by experiencing it that I think you could take out and apply in almost any other environment. So at the very front end, after someone starts with Danaher, they don't start doing their job, depending on the level, and it varies. So for entry-level people, the period of immersion isn't as long as for senior leaders, but I'll use a senior leader example. So for someone who comes in at a director or vice president level, we don't let them do their job for at least 8 weeks. We spend 8 weeks investing in that hire as soon as they get here to make sure that they understand the Danaher Business System, and it's in a really cool combination of ways. It's through classroom training that's led by these people who are called Danaher Business Leaders, or DBSLs, who are just steeped in all of the tools and all of the approaches, and they'll teach some of that in classroom. And then it's experiencing it by participating in some of the events that you learn how to do. So great example, you'll learn about how we approach a kaizen event in 1 week, and that'll include classroom training, and you'll be with other people that are learning that for the first time at all levels in the organization. And then the next week you'll go participate in a kaizen. So for me, as a new leader coming in, I had my first 8 weeks of this experience, and my first day started in classroom training to learn how to do a problem-solving process, which literally gave me fight or flight halfway through the second day because it involves very specific ways of charting data and information that was very unusual and very unique to me, but every leader goes through this. The next week I actually did a problem-solving process event on something I understood, which was we were trying to solve our need to increase our internal fill rate, which is our internal promotion rate. That's one of our stated goals that everyone's working toward, is we have a certain percentage of jobs that we like to fill with internals, and we weren't doing that enough in Europe, so we got a group together to use our Kaizen approach to fix that problem. And so I went through the classroom training 1 week, and then the next week I was in Barcelona doing this Kaizen event to learn and participate in using one of the Danaher Business System tools. So it's really unique. It's a huge investment. It's probably a huge change for people who haven't seen this approach. I hadn't seen it before, and I came from Heidrick & Struggles for 10 years and then working inside a pharmaceutical company for 10 years, recruiting people from all different environments, including GE, and I have never seen a company willing to invest this much at the front end to make sure that their leaders are successful, knowing how to operate in their business environment. So this is kind of a snapshot. It's a little wordy, but this kind of gives you an idea for how it's set up. So it's functionally specific. So every new leader coming in, and then every person coming in, has a version of an immersion plan that's tailored for them. So if you're a president or a GM, you're going to have kind of a broader business management and business leadership perspective, and your plan is going to be tailored. So it's going to be tailored for unique for each individual. So in terms of scalability, it's not something you could do for everyone, but you could take some of the same principles. So what's the takeaway from this? It's really planned out in advance, right? So before a new hire starts, you have a really clear plan for maybe if it's even their first week, what will they be doing to learn the process and the people and how things work. So this is just a snapshot of the different ways that you can develop it. This is meant to look overwhelming a little bit, but so this is an example of what my immersion plan looked like. It was an Excel workbook with tabs. The first tab, the top list is all books that were sitting there on my desk waiting for me when I got there. So I had some light reading to do on the plane trips going to my immersion events over the first 8 weeks, but it's the same books everybody reads when they join, right? It's good, basic manufacturing principles, and it all reinforces the Danaher Business System approach. It's articles that have been written by the Harvard Business Review on our company. It helps you really understand what you've gotten yourself into. We design these for new hires, and then at a certain point when you are a new hire, you take it over and it belongs to you. So there's pre-work that's done by a combination of the HR team and the hiring manager to put together a plan, and it's a template, right? I mean, the first tab on this never changes. Everybody gets the same books. So then you get through the bottom, and it's, depending on when you've joined, there are different kaizen events that are happening. There are different training programs, and that's all. We share that really effectively on a SharePoint site where you can put this together in advance. So the first step is just making sure it's really planned, making sure that the new hire owns it. So every week, at the end of the week, I had to complete my immersion journal, and I had a one-on-one with my new leader, my new boss, to go over what I had learned that week about the people, our approach to planning, and our process. As it was kind of fun because you could just capture everything you learned in the week, and then you could also kind of verify and validate with your new organization if you're picking up on the right stuff, and if any adjustments had to be made along the way, we could. So there's a planning involved. There's ownership by the new hire, and then there's also engagement from the leader that's made the hire, the hiring manager that's required. And so I was trying to think about why this mattered and why this was relevant, because it's a little bit removed, right? This onboarding and talent acquisition match up with each other, but they're not necessarily one and the same. So what I've seen that's, to me, the most impactful element of this is that it really does help with that critical quality of hire measure that we're all, elusive quality of hire measure that we're all going after. It helps with ensuring that you can still tell if you've made a hiring decision error, but you've got the right safety net in place to make sure that if you have done all the other right steps and have a great new leader that's joining, that they have the ability to learn what they need to do their job, and they also have the language that they need to communicate. So someone was asking me because I thought I knew what my job was before I went through Immersion. I interviewed, I tried to assess it, and it seemed like it was a pretty straightforward talent acquisition leadership role where there was a lot of change required. And when I think back about would I have actually been doing different things in this first year to accomplish the goals that I knew from the job spec and from my conversations with the hiring team that I was going to have to achieve? Did anything fundamentally change? And the answer is no, I'm still doing the same things. Here's what we're focused on: process, candidate care, all the things that typically a new talent acquisition leader should be looking at in an organization that requires change. But how I'm doing it is different. So when I'm going to conversations with other leaders, I'm taking a lot more data with me than I'm usually comfortable taking, right? I'm usually the one that will go in and say, we need to do this, and I'm pretty convincing. And by the way, if anyone's not sure if recruiters are sales and marketing people after they watch those pitches in there, let's just clear the air on that one. We are definitely sales and marketing people. So I was used to going in with an idea and a little bit through, results or past history, just be able to make a pitch on it. In my new environment, we have a very high requirement for data, and it has to be presented a certain way, or you see people, their eyes kind of glass over and they're not listening because you don't have enough data for you to have credibility. So I think when I'm looking at this and saying, okay, how do leaders approach their jobs differently? I think we still expect them to be achieving the same goals, but the method for achieving them and the method for communicating with your key stakeholders changes, and it saves a lot of time. So if you can communicate in the same language with the amount of data that people need, it helps make decisions more quickly. It helps process become more simple, and it helps avoid 5 different ways of doing things because everybody agrees to one and they just go with it, and then you don't have to revisit it. So it's pretty elegant in how it works in our environment. I actually gained tools in my first week that made me more successful, and I had been in a role for 12 years coming into a new one. That was great. It was great to have some tools that I thought I knew what I was doing, but I had new approaches and new ways of presenting information that I may have not come up with on my own. And it's also a really structured approach to creating that really important network for new hires. So when you start off in a new job and you're so anxious to start getting results on the board and getting wins, to hear from your employer that you're not allowed to do that yet, that you need to learn the process first, and that you need to spend time building your network first, has longer term residual positive impact, right? Because then you've got, maybe it's a cohort group of people that also joined at the same time, maybe it's someone that was in a class with you, but we're telling new hires that we want you to spend time building your network because you're gonna have to use that to get your job done, and I think that's pretty unique. And it's also now part of our recruiting pitch. I mean, I use it all the time. I mean, what other company invests that much at the front end to make sure that you're successful? Not a lot. Some do a little bit of that, and I'd love to hear if others are, but I think that's fairly unique. And finally, you have to be careful how you position this, but it's a little bit of an insurance policy, right? I mean, if we're taking this much time to do our selection and we're investing 8 weeks at the front end to say, we'll teach you what you need to be successful, for people that are reluctant to make a change, and especially when people start to interview with Danaher, they'll hear, oh, it's so process oriented. I heard that. You're too creative. They're gonna brainwash you. It's gonna be horrible. This helped me realize that I would get the information I needed. I wasn't going to be expected right away to ramp up in this and understand this Danaher Business System without having worked in it. So I think it does serve as an insurance policy too. So I was hoping that when I went over this, it would spark some discussion or some questions that maybe people could think about pieces of this that they might be able to implement in their environments, or that might spark some questions about how we do this that could help you take it back home and use elements of it. So I purposely wanted to tell you about it and then open up for questions to see if anyone has anything I could answer. Yes?
So the insurance policy,
Do you see a lot of drop-off for individuals that come in during that time frame?
So we measure the turnover within 2 years, and we have 6 KPIs that every business runs on, and one of them is internal fill rate, and the other is actually it's not that one, it's time to fill, but it's internal. We for senior leaders we measure. It's another KPI that's not in every business, but it's one of the HR KPIs, and it is. Do senior leaders leave within 2 years? And we have we watch that very carefully because we look at that as a key. This is a key driver for that. And when it happens, we have a Danaher Business System process that we use to go back in and look at that carefully. And what we normally find is that we didn't do this right. We didn't have a planned, thoughtful immersion plan. We didn't stick to it. We got anxious. They were 4 weeks out. We really needed them in that role, so we cut it short. Where we've done this and we've invested the time at the front end, it's pretty successful. I'll let you decide who gets to, yeah.
How long would you say is the onboarding portion? So from the time that the person starts to the time that they can hit the ground running doing their actual job?
8 weeks for a vice president.
Oh, wow.
8 weeks. Or for a general manager, sometimes we'll keep them out for 3 months. But they'll be visiting, but we'll integrate it into so for their scope, guess what? One of those weeks is going to be in their plant in China doing a kaizen. They're going to be meeting the people. They're not going to be held accountable to deliver results, but they're held accountable to meet people, and we'll be smart about the people we have them meeting with. They'll be doing customer visits. They'll be doing, events that are relevant for their business.
Do you guys have a similar program for corporate employees? So for somebody who is not out in the field?
Yeah, I did it. I'm a corporate employee, and I had an 8-week immersion plan where I was all over the world meeting everybody in all 7 operating companies that I was going to work with, doing a kaizen in someplace in Wisconsin where one night of the week I was like peeling tape off the floor and we put even corporate people go through it. So
Fantastic.
I even had to get some safety boots.
We are in the process of completely revamping our onboarding. And one of the things we're trying to figure out is who's responsible for this. So do you have a training team delivering this, or is it subject matter experts?
So we have a whole RACI that we have set up for how this works. Of course we do, because this is part of how we do everything. It's accountability and responsibility are shared between the hiring manager and HR.
Right.
HR has a big role in it.
So is HR the one? What I'm talking about is 2 weeks of delivering the content. For instance, if you're talking about your culture or you're doing training.
So great question. So we have a very highly developed, so we're really good at talent development. Talent acquisition is where we needed to improve. Talent development at Danaher is incredible. We have 3 tiers of programs that are set a year in advance. We have a calendar, we have consistent delivery. So it's just about looking at that and hooking into it. You're hooking somebody into existing programs that are already set up. So for a certain level, we do an executive orientation. That happens once a quarter. So we'll put that at the front end or the back end of your immersion, depending on when you join. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I was curious, I know you've been there just a year, but can you share some of the backstory about how this got created? Because I'm certain this
Sure.
didn't happen overnight, and it's probably several iterations in. So can you talk a little bit about what the issues were and how you came to the point of saying this is the right solution?
Right, and I think this level of immersion did evolve, right? It's not something you decide to do, and in true Danaher fashion, I mean, the whole idea of continuous improvement, it's our culture, and it's been very interesting for me to see that. And the whole idea of kaizen is you come in, you spend a week, you tackle a problem, and then you sustain it, and then you come back and you do it again, right? A kaizen is about incremental improvement. So it's the same thing with this immersion. It started out as a need for people to understand some of the core elements of the Danaher Business System. So that includes, we have something called the problem-solving process. It includes an 11 by 13 sheet of paper that has certain cells that have to be filled out, and you have to make sure that you've done a Pareto graph of the root cause of your problem before you go out and tackle a problem. So I think it's been this build of specific tools that we use to run our business, and the need to make sure that any key leader and really anyone in the organization builds that knowledge base so that they know how to do all of it. So I think it probably started by just including people in the trainings that were set. And then I think we probably took a step back and said, well, we need to put a thoughtful plan in place. And then it's I think it's been probably in the last 5 years that it's really been more clearly defined, like around like this, right? So that's when we came in and we said, okay, well, where are the roles where we can really have a big impact? Maybe we'll start with senior leaders. Okay, for senior leaders who are GMs, they need this. For sales leaders, they need funnel management on top of this. For corporate people, we'll wing it. We'll use one of these and we'll modify it a little bit. And then after that gets established, it starts to permeate the rest of the organization. So even if you have someone who's a support person on one of these folks, they're going to need to pick up elements so that they can communicate the same way and support that. So does that make sense?
It does. And do you feel stifled? Do you feel like you're in your little box?
That's a bad question for me. So part of what we do in our whole selection, that's a whole nother conversation. We use assessments as a part of our hiring process. And I was worried when I saw mine, when it came back, because I don't know how they managed to hire me, because I'm so much more creative than the average Danaher leader. But that's why they hired me, because talent acquisition needed a little bit of a kick, right? And so I don't, but I feel like I'm hitting the sides of it sometimes, but that's what some roles have to be doing in our organization. If you just keep it this way, you can't innovate, you can't grow, you can't really transform. So I took that as a question to me personally, and the answer to that is yes. I think if you ask some of our other more traditional leaders who are general managers of our businesses, they're gonna say it makes them better and it helps propel what they're trying to do. I'm just kind of, for me, talent acquisition and what needs to happen, it has to be a little disruptive and creative, so I have to feel like I'm bouncing up against the confines of that box a little bit. Yeah.
Hi, Alice. Thank
Hello.
you. This was so helpful. I work for a growing startup. We talked about it earlier.
Right.
And we are looking at larger scale onboarding programs, but we started on the opposite end of the scale. So we didn't start with our leaders. We actually started with our call center.
Yeah.
We have a call center and an operations team, and we want that to be as low turnover as possible, as high, an enormous amount of retention and cross-functional work. And so that's where we're building. It's like a 4-week immersion before they can actually get on the phones and do anything. And so a lot of that, we're figuring out a lot of the tweaking and figuring out where we need to be adding like leadership and personal development. And
Right.
so, long story short, is what kind of personal development goes into your 8-week immersion? Do you have stuff that's specifically for you and like some of the touchy-feely, this is how I grow as a leader stuff, or is it very like?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So we have a pretty advanced leadership development offering. So when I went through my immersion, we have a couple classes. One's called Performance for Growth? P for G. Everything's abbreviated. I forget now what they stand for. But Performance for Growth means it's about your personal performance. And then there's D for G, which is Development for Growth. So that in that process, an individual is required to take a look at their development areas and come up with a plan to address them. So yeah, I mean, I went through as a part of my immersion, I went through the training on what development for growth is in my environment, and then I had that as an action item for my first year to have a development plan in place. So I had all the tools there. Did I do that? Yeah, I did that. Was I a little bit more worried after I got out of my immersion about trying to show some ROI on the investment they made in me? Yeah. So I think this year I'll probably see more of that creep in, and I think that's also the kind of the message. And I was just talking to someone about how effective this is, and it's really about the individual. So for me, I still have my immersion plan. I still revisit it. I was assigned a mentor during that. He accidentally put recurring calls on that went into this year. I didn't take them off. I keep those on, and I keep engaged with that person. And I don't have to for my immersion. That was just meant to be for the first year, but I've purposely extended that. And so I think as you're looking at your onboarding and my advice would be a framework is great, right? Because for me as a leader, it kind of gave me an out, right? I had to learn this way. I had to spend the time investing in learning before I had to deliver, which is great. So for some people, they need to hear that, but then they also need to at some point grab onto that and own it for themselves and keep going with it. So I think it's kind of that might be what you're trying to accomplish with the onboarding and with the personal development. I think to the extent that you can push that back and make it a little more self-service and make the tools available but not required, I think that would be my advice.
Do you find that going through this process that sometimes you might have specific hiring managers that kind of cut those corners on like a regular basis because they don't have the buy-in of how important the onboarding process is? And if so, what kind of tips do you guys kind of do for coaching them to get them to kind of have the green light turn on their head of how important that is? I think that's a really huge struggle in the corporation that I work for, is getting that type of buy-in.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're a little bit lucky because our leaders, I mean, it's a type, it's a profile, and success at Danaher looks a certain way. So if you're not leading through DBS, you're not leading. It doesn't last long, right? You're not going to be out there with your own version of Alice White, DBS. No, that's not going to happen. You're going to kind of figure out the beauty and simplicity of it and roll with it and realize it helps you get results faster, or you're not going to be there. And it does help. I mean, it sounds a little bit harsh, but it does help with that consistency because being a good leader depends on our leadership anchors. One of them is leads through DBS. So when I went through our executive champion orientation, which was part of our my onboarding, we have our leaders teaching that. So I had Tom Joyce, who's the CEO of Danaher, teaching a module on, not on what he wanted to teach on, it was on just an element of DBS that he has to be well-versed enough that he can actually teach it back. Okay. We require that of all of our leaders. So you can't really fake it. You're either into it and it works for you and it propels your leadership capability, or you move on. Are there pockets where you have leaders where they don't think it's as relevant and they kind of skip over it for some hires? Yeah. And are there repeat offenders? Yeah, there are. But from an 80-20 standpoint, they're the outliers, so we don't spend as much time worrying about the 100% compliance. If we have 80% of people doing the right thing, we just, that's part of our culture, is you just keep focused on that and you don't worry about the rest. So it's a good question, though.
Anybody else? All right.
Maybe I caught us up on time then.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
thank you so much. That
Yeah,
was really
you're welcome.
interesting.
You're welcome.